Nia had always been different. Not loud, not wild like the other children, not even shy, just silent. A silence that was heavy, watchful, unsettling. She carried it like a second skin as she moved through the narrow, red-dusted paths of the village, barefoot and limping, with her matted hair hanging low over her face. The villagers called her the ghost girl, though never to her face. They said she was cursed from birth, that her eyes held things no child should see, that her shadow sometimes moved before she did. She never responded. She never needed to. Her silence was a wall no one dared to cross. At 14, she had the presence of someone much older, and the loneliness of someone who had outlived too many people. Her skin was the color of the earth after rain, rich, dark, alive, but her eyes, deep brown flecked with something lighter, seemed to belong to another world entirely. She didn't smile. Didn't laugh. Barely ate in public. And when she did speak, it was only to the chickens or the fireflies or the roots of the old baobab tree outside her window. Nia lived on the edge of the village, where the forest began to stretch out into a no-man's land of thorns and twisted paths. Her home was a sagging structure made of mud and bamboo, patched over with rusty sheets of tin. The compound was wide but eerily barren, the soil unnaturally dry, as if the land itself refused to nourish anything there. No flowers grew, no weeds dared peek through. Even animals avoided the place. Goats would cross the road rather than walk past her gate. Birds never perched on the roof. And every time the wind blew, it seemed to whisper things no one else could hear. The elders remembered her mother, beautiful Miriam, with her soft laughter and long braids that smelled of hibiscus and honey. Miriam had been kind, generous, too good for the man she married after Nia's father vanished in the war. That man, Bako, was a blacksmith known for his strength and temper. He made tools for the farmers and chains for the prisons. His hands were always black with soot and his eyes always sharp with suspicion. When Miriam died suddenly, just a few months after the marriage, people whispered, but no one said it aloud. Nia had been 5, just old enough to know that something terrible had happened, and just young enough to never be believed if she told. From that moment on, she stopped talking. Bako stayed. Took over Miriam's land. Let it rot. Let the house crumble. Let the child grow up wild and alone. He fed her when he remembered, locked her in the shed when she stared at him too long, beat her when he felt like it. But he never quite trusted her. Something about her gaze unsettled him, as if she saw things even he didn't know he feared. The limp came after a bad winter when she was 9. Bako claimed she fell from the mango tree. But the bruises said otherwise. Villagers saw the way she dragged her left foot after that, how she stopped running altogether, how she winced when she sat. Yet they did nothing. Because the land around her house had started to die. Because sometimes they heard humming coming from her window at night, low and strange and sorrowful. Because the oldest women began to murmur about a story they'd half forgotten, a spirit beneath the earth, ancient and angry, awakened by blood and pain. It was just an old tale. A myth meant to scare children. A warning against digging too deep, against spilling blood on sacred soil. But in Nia's case, the signs were too many. The day she turned 12, the ground near the chicken coop split open after a rainstorm. No one could explain it. The next year, thunder shook only her compound, though no clouds filled the sky. By 14, the villagers had made a habit of avoiding the path that led to her home altogether. Inside the crumbling house, Nia kept to herself. She carved little dolls from sticks and cloth, stitched with her mother's old thread. She lined them in a circle under her bed, their heads tilted toward the floor as if listening for something. She fed them sugar grains and whispered lullabies to them. At night, when the winds howled through the cracks in the tin roof, she listened. Really listened. The voices came soft at first. Just murmurs. A shiver in the floorboards. A cold breath under the mattress. But as she grew older, they became clearer. They didn't speak in any language she recognized, but she understood them all the same. They didn't tell her to hurt anyone. Not yet. They just reminded her that she was not alone. That pain had meaning. That roots grew strongest where the soil was wounded. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would rise and press her ear to the ground, just to feel the pulse. It was faint, but it was there. Something alive beneath. Waiting. Watching. Breathing with her. Bako didn't notice. Or pretended not to. He stayed in the forge most days, hammering iron and muttering curses. But even he had started locking his door at night. He drank more. Talked less. And when he looked at Nia, his eyes darted like a man expecting the worst. The village's children dared each other to peek through her windows, to toss stones at her roof, to shout insults from a distance. But none stayed long. One boy claimed he saw her floating. Another swore her eyes turned white. A third never spoke again after he stepped onto her compound and his nose started bleeding. No one knew the truth. Not yet. They didn't know about the whispers. About the warmth under the earth. About the way Nia's blood sang when it touched the soil. They didn't know that she had dreams, dreams where the trees bowed to her, where bones rose from graves to dance in the moonlight, where her mother's voice told her secrets only the dead could know. They didn't know what she had become. Or what she was becoming. But they would. Very soon. It began with Bako's eyes, bloodshot, jittery, darting at corners that held no threat. He spoke to shadows now, muttering to himself in half-finished sentences as he stirred his bitter morning brew. The villagers had stopped coming by for tools. They claimed his metal snapped too easily, that his fire was cold, that his hammer no longer rang true. Bako cursed them under his breath, spat on the ground, and blamed Nia for it all. She brings rot, he said. My forge is dying because of her. My fire is afraid of her. He watched her like a hawk watches a mouse, unblinking, tense, always hungry. Nia had grown taller in recent months, her limbs stretching out like branches after rain, but she remained quiet, still, shadowed. Her eyes, those cursed things, stared through him now. Not at him, through him. And when she stood still, she looked too much like her mother. That haunted Bako more than anything. Miriam had been the only one who softened him, and now her ghost lingered in this child who wouldn't break. The more silent she grew, the louder his rage became. He locked her in the goat shed at night, tied with iron chains, her feet raw from walking barefoot, her arms bruised from pulling against rusted links. Some nights he gave her a bowl of cold maize. Other nights, nothing. And always he watched from the doorway, waiting for her to scream. But she never did. She made no sound. Her silence burned hotter than flames. When he asked her, "What are you?" she didn't answer. When he shouted, "What are you doing to me?" her eyes blinked once, slow, deliberate, like the closing of a grave. The villagers didn't intervene. They passed the compound without looking, kept their children away, and muttered stories behind cupped palms. She's not right, they said. The earth has touched her. Best we mind our business before she brings her curse here. And so they left her. Just as they had left her mother. Just as the earth had left that compound hollow. Then came the night of the blood moon. It rose like a wound in the sky, deep red, swollen, unblinking. The air turned thick with the smell of metal and dust. Dogs howled, then went silent. The wind, which had always whispered, suddenly stopped. No leaves moved. No insects chirped. Time seemed to hold its breath. Bako had been drinking. But this night, the drink didn't blur his senses, it sharpened them. The voices in his head were clearer than ever, egging him on, telling him that tonight was the night to end the evil that had grown under his roof. He staggered from the house with his hammer in one hand and a bundle of long, black nails in the other. Not just any nails, he had forged them from ancestral swords handed down to him by his grandfather, blades once used to protect the village from enemies, weapons soaked in blood and legacy. He believed they still held power. Nia sat on the ground, her thin back to the baobab, her legs folded beneath her. She didn't move when he approached. She didn't flinch when he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her across the courtyard. Her eyes found the blood moon and stayed on it, as if transfixed, as if it were whispering to her the same way the soil did. Bako threw her to the ground and kicked her legs out in front of her. "Tonight, you go back to where you came from," he growled. His breath stank of palm wine and madness. "You're not my daughter. You're not Miriam's child. You're something else." She didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any scream. With a snarl, he took one of the nails, long and twisted, still warm from the forge, and placed it against her right foot. Her skin sizzled. Her body jerked, but she didn't cry out. Not even when the hammer came down once, twice, 3 times. The nail sank through flesh, through tendon, through bone, into the hard, dry earth beneath. Her body trembled, but still, no scream. The second foot, same process. Same hammer. Same merciless blows. Her eyes clenched shut, her jaw locked, but her voice remained a void. Bako stood above her, sweating, panting, eyes wild with something that looked like triumph. "Now you can't run. Now the land will decide what to do with you." He spat at her feet. "If you are of this world, you'll bleed like the rest of us. But if you're not, let the ground take you." He stepped back. That was when the earth groaned. A low, guttural sound rose from the soil beneath them, like wood bending under pressure, like the rumble of a coming storm. Nia's head fell back, eyes wide open now, glowing faintly in the blood moonlight. Her lips parted, and though no words came, her breath moved in rhythm with the tremor. Cracks formed around her nailed feet, long veins of darkness splitting the hardened ground. The wind returned, not with a whisper this time, but with a howl. A hot gust circled the compound, lifting dust and ashes into the air. Trees bent inward. The baobab moaned. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed once, then fell silent forever. Bako stumbled back, the hammer slipping from his hands. His mouth moved, but no sound escaped. The sky above had stopped moving. The moon hung like a bleeding eye over them all, casting everything in crimson light. Nia's body arched slightly, as if pulled upward by an invisible force. Her hands twitched. Blood pooled around her nailed feet, seeping into the cracked earth, and the ground drank it hungrily. The soil darkened, pulsed, and then, went still. Bako backed away slowly. "This is not my fault," he whispered to himself. "She's the cursed one. She brought this. I only tried to save the village." Nia didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. He turned and walked back into the house, muttering prayers he barely remembered. He didn't look back. He didn't see the way the blood disappeared into the earth like it had never been. He didn't notice how the cracks had stopped spreading, as if they were waiting. He left her there. Under the moon. Feet nailed, body broken, eyes wide open to the stars. And as he closed the door behind him, the wind whispered one final sentence that only Nia could hear. "We heard you." It began with a sound no one in the village could place, a grinding, grating wail that slid through the trees just before sunrise. It was like bones being scraped down a rusted blade, like iron groaning beneath an unseen weight. The goats stirred uneasily in their pens. Birds burst from their nests, shrieking in reverse patterns, wheeling wildly in the sky as if chased by something the villagers could not see. Children woke crying in their sleep. Women pressed charms to their foreheads. Old men sat up on their mats and refused to speak. From the edge of the compound, someone saw it first, Nia's limp body, slumped forward, head bowed, her thin back covered in dust and blood, still nailed to the ground. But behind her, something moved. Something rose. At first, it was a shadow, no more than a dark smudge on the dawn. Then it began to gain shape, though it shifted with every blink. It was tall, taller than any man in the village, and its limbs seemed both too long and not long enough, constantly rearranging as if remembering how to be. Its skin, or what looked like skin, was charcoal and cracked, with glowing seams like lava beneath cooled rock. Where its face should have been was only a blur, but its presence felt undeniable, like a scream that never stopped echoing. The earth hissed beneath it, and as it stepped forward, the iron nails that held Nia's feet began to melt. Steam rose from the holes left behind. The creature moved with unsettling grace, its body flickering between the girl's outline and something far older. For one heartbeat it looked like Nia, then like Miriam, her mother, then something older than both, something cloaked in centuries of buried sorrow. The villagers, hiding behind doors and peeking through cracked windows, watched in frozen silence. No one dared approach. Not even the elders with their spirit beads and fire charms. The creature didn't glance their way. It turned slowly and walked toward the house. And then they heard it. A scream, sharp, guttural, male. Bako. Another scream. A thud. Then a wet crunch that sent shivers down every spine in the village. More silence. The sun had just crested the hills when the door to the house creaked open. And there she stood. Nia. Her feet were bare, her skin streaked with blood, dirt, and ash. But she stood. Not slumped. Not limp. She moved slowly, each step a limp, her legs trembling like a newborn deer's, yet somehow, purposeful. She smiled faintly, her lips dry and cracked. But her eyes, those were not the eyes of the girl they once knew. They glowed. A soft, golden light flickered in them like candle flames caught in a jar, alive and patient. Something looked out from behind them, something watching, something that remembered. She held something in her right hand. A hammer. Bako's hammer. It dripped crimson with every step. She dragged it behind her, letting its bloodied weight scrape against the stones of the compound. It rang dully, like the end of a funeral. The villagers didn't dare breathe too loudly as she passed. She did not speak. She did not look at anyone. She limped back into the house where her mother once sang, where her blood had soaked the floor, where her screams had gone unanswered for years. And she closed the door gently behind her. But that night, the village did not sleep. The dogs howled, not in hunger, not in warning, but in sorrow. A deep, mournful sound that made even the oldest hounds tremble in their fur. Birds flew in the wrong direction, against the wind, in tight spirals, their calls disoriented and broken. And then, the mirrors cracked. Every mirror. From the medicine woman's sacred basin to the small hand glass of the village seamstress, each one split down the middle with a sudden, violent snap. No one saw it happen. They only heard the sound of glass breaking, again and again, echoing through the night. The elders gathered in hushed terror, some trying to consult spirits, others arguing whether to flee or pray. But none of their beads warmed. None of their candles stayed lit. Every ritual failed. It was as if the village had fallen into a place outside of blessing, outside of time. By morning, no one dared speak her name. And yet, every single person who had ever whispered against Nia, ever ignored her cries, ever laughed at her limp or accused her of being born wrong, felt watched. As if the soil beneath their huts remembered them. As if something below the ground was listening. Waiting. Breathing. At first, the villagers convinced themselves it was nothing. Bako was a cruel man, a drinker, a screamer, the kind who could vanish into the forest chasing his demons or another man's wife. He had no kin left, no friends, only grudging acquaintances and the woman he beat and called daughter. So, when days passed and no one saw him, they shrugged it off with muttered words like coward and gone. Some even smirked. Good riddance. But beneath the gossip was fear, dense, unsaid, humming like a drum beneath their feet. Because Nia remained. She walked now. Openly. Freely. Limping still, but never in pain. Her bare feet patted the dusty ground without shame, without fear. Yet wherever she walked, the soil reacted, no longer with indifference but with memory. Around her home, the earth had blackened, burned, as if fire had erupted silently from beneath. The scorched soil stretched in strange patterns, some said it looked like ancient writing, others like roots. Nothing grew there anymore. Not grass, not weed, not ant. The place felt suffocated. Still, she walked. In the mornings she would be seen standing in the fields, facing the rising sun. Not moving. Just standing, lips parted, whispering. Some thought it was prayer. But children, more honest in their terror, told different stories. "She talks to shadows," one boy whispered, hiding behind his mother's wrapper. "They whisper back," said another, his eyes wide. "From the corn, from the ground. From inside the trees." An older child, curious and cruel, followed her one day, taunting from a distance, throwing stones that never landed. He didn't come home that night. They searched the fields and the edge of the forest. They found only his shoes, placed side by side on a patch of scorched earth, his footprints leading up to them, and nowhere after. That was the day Nia returned to the village square. She walked in alone, her face calm, her eyes unreadable. Her dress was the same tattered cloth she'd always worn, but her neck bore something new, something none of them could ignore. A necklace. It dangled just above her heart, made of twisted iron nails, small bones strung between them, and a single dark feather at its center. Some said the bones were bird bones. Others were not so sure. She did not speak. She only walked to the center of the square, where the old well sat, and dipped a calabash into the water as if nothing had changed. No one dared move. Even the sellers and gamblers fell still. Her presence pressed against their throats like invisible hands. She turned once. Her eyes swept over them. Not with hatred. With silence. Then she walked back into the path that led home. By nightfall, the village council gathered. The elders sat in the clay hut behind the shrine, the smoke of their sacred fire curling like uncertain fingers around their faces. Words were hushed, clipped. "She is cursed. She is possessed. Maybe Baco beat her too far, and now madness has set in. She is dangerous. She must be confronted." But none dared act. Only one voice, old and cracked, broke the circle of fear. The seer. Old Noma. She had not left her compound in 2 years, but tonight her voice came low and brittle from the dark corner, where she sat like a forgotten statue. "She is no longer under man's law," Noma said. The fire snapped. A clay pot cracked. "What law then?" someone whispered. Noma's cloudy eyes rolled toward the flame. "The law of the buried," she said. The murmurs rose, uncertain and broken. Until another voice joined, the blind woman, Equa, who had once been the village's spirit reader before her sight was stolen by a lightning strike decades ago. She leaned forward, blind eyes glowing white in the firelight, and said, "She was nailed to the earth. And now, the earth walks with her." Silence. No one knew what to say. No one wanted to know what it meant. They dispersed before dawn, each elder clutching their beads tighter, walking faster than usual, avoiding the scorched path near Nia's home. By morning, no one would speak of what was said. But the whisper traveled, as whispers always do. The woman who was nailed to the ground, now walked with something else beneath her feet. And the village of denial began to rot from the inside. It began with a goat. Old Bakery's prized she-goat, swollen with pregnancy, was found one morning lying dead outside her pen, entrails spread in a circle, tongue bitten off, and iron nails hammered into each hoof. No tracks. No sound in the night. Only silence, heavy, watchful. Then the children started screaming. First was little Tun, barely 5, found wailing beside the river, blood trailing from his feet. When they lifted him, they saw it, rusted nails driven into the tender flesh of his heels. He could not say who did it. He only wept, pointing to the soil. "It opened its mouth," he sobbed. "It asked me to listen." The village reeled, panic curling at the edges of every home. Doors slammed earlier, prayers echoed louder, and whispers of old curses swept through the huts like smoke. They blamed Nia, though no one said her name aloud. She still walked, slow, barefoot, her strange necklace of bones and nails clicking softly with each step. But now, she muttered constantly, not to herself, but to things unseen. Her voice carried syllables that twisted the air, a language that didn't belong to the living. Sometimes, she knelt in front of trees, pressing her palm against their trunks, whispering softly. The trees, tall, ancient baobabs and lean neem, would lean toward her, leaves quivering though no wind stirred. Villagers who watched too long said the trees moved. Bent low, as if listening. Or obeying. One brave boy, older than most, threw a stone at her from behind a fence. He vanished that same night. His house was later found torn from its roots like a yam. Only the iron nail from Nia's necklace lay on the doorstep. The fear became unspoken law. Yet, within this terror, the truth began to seep through dreams, through memories. Nia had not always been like this. As a child, she had heard whispers from beneath her bed, from the cracks in the walls, from the places dirt clung to skin. Voices that sang, hummed, told secrets. She never told anyone at first. Until the dreams came, dreams of burial and fire, of ancient iron and red rivers. Dreams that bled into waking. Her mother had known. That much was certain now. People remembered how the woman had kept Nia close, fed her bitter herbs, burned strange roots, and kept old charms under her mattress. Some thought it was protection. Others now realized it was suppression. A mother's desperate attempt to hush something older than herself. But Baco, brutal in fists and blind in soul, had torn those protections down. His chains, his beatings, his final act of nailing her to the earth, it had not suppressed the spirit. It had freed it. And now, Nia was not alone. In the afternoons, she began to sculpt. With black ash gathered from her compound and fragments of bone, some said from animals, others weren't sure, she crafted small figures. Twisted, faceless, bound with twine and dried herbs. She placed them in secret, like gifts or warnings. One was found outside the herbalist's hut. Another at the threshold of the palm wine tapper. Some ignored them. Others threw them into fire. But those who burned the figures all met strange ends, sickness, delirium, or worse. Then came the elder's plea. Chief Udo, one of the oldest and most powerful men in the village, once a friend to Baco, finally went to her. He knelt at the blackened soil just outside her home, trembling, head bowed. "I beg you, child," he said, voice breaking. "I have grandchildren. I have made mistakes. We all have. But I did not harm you. Please, let it end." Nia stepped from the shadows. Her dress hung loose. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dusk, not gold this time, but a color too deep, too ancient to name. She reached out with her hand. He did not flinch. Her fingers touched his forehead. He screamed. Not in pain, but in revelation. His body spasmed violently as if struck by lightning. His eyes rolled back. His mouth moved, but no words came, only air, ragged and heavy. He dropped to the ground like wet cloth. Dead. The women who buried him later said his face looked peaceful. Almost relieved. But from that day on, no elder dared speak against her again. Some began placing small offerings outside her home, bowls of groundnuts, pieces of cloth, bits of iron. Not worship. Appeasement. Others tried to flee the village, but the paths twisted, the forest thickened unnaturally, and they always found themselves back where they started, at the edge of the village, near the old compound with scorched earth and whispering trees. It became clear to all, Nia was not simply cursed. She was chosen. And the curse? The curse belonged to the village. They met under the baobab tree at dusk. The elders had called for a council, something ancient, something sacred. In whispered voices, they agreed, Nia must be severed from the earth. Whatever bond had taken root when her feet were nailed, it had grown into something beyond human. And it was spreading. The crops were the first signs. Yams rotted in the soil before they could be harvested. Millet turned to ash between fingers. Banana trees wept red sap and refused to bear fruit. Then the wells dried. Not from heat, not from drought, just emptied. Even the river grew thin, as if recoiling from something unseen. They feared what was coming. They remembered the old tales, of soil spirits, of the undersoul, of what happens when the land chooses to awaken through blood. It had happened once, centuries ago, in another village swallowed whole by vines and silence. The land must sleep, the oldest said. And she must be made to let go. So they chose three, a priest, a hunter, and a witch. The priest, Iadil, was known for casting out demons and newborns. The hunter, Ekon, had once killed a lion with only a spear in his chant. The witch, Mamanjeri, was older than memory, her eyes milk-white but her words sharp as blade grass. Together, they walked toward the scorched compound as night fell. They carried sacred items, a gourd filled with water from the oldest well, iron dust mixed with salt, and a severing blade carved from ancient stone. They sang as they walked, chants meant to silence the earth's hunger. A ritual that hadn't been performed in over 100 years. They were never seen whole again. Only one returned. At sunrise, Ekon the hunter staggered into the village square. His clothes were soaked in something black and sticky. His eyes, burned clean out. Sockets red and smoking. His mouth moved on its own, whispering over and over, "She sees from below now, she sees, she sees." He collapsed. Dead before they reached him. And the land wept. Vines erupted from the soil around Nia's home, thick, veined, pulsing faintly like arteries. Roots burst from the earth and crawled up walls. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, some bending backward as if broken by an unseen force. The animals fled. Even the vultures would not land. Nia stood in the center of it all. Calm. Barefoot. She began walking again. Her steps left behind wet soil that bubbled like a heartbeat. From each footprint, roots curled upward, slithering out like tongues, seeking purchase. The ground groaned wherever she passed. Houses near her compound began to crack. Chickens laid stones instead of eggs. Dogs barked and then dropped dead. She visited her mother's grave for the first time in 9 years. It was a simple mound under a sycamore, long forgotten. Grass had grown thick over it, and the stone marker had tilted to one side. Nia knelt before it. Her fingers traced the dirt lovingly. She whispered aloud, her voice clear, steady, and terrible in its certainty. "You hid me. But now I stand." And the soil trembled in reply. Behind her, the air thickened. The shadows lengthened even in daylight. The trees surrounding the grave tilted toward her like mourners, rustling low and sorrowful. From beneath the grave, a pulse radiated, dark and ancient. As though the spirit that now walked within Nia had reached downward and touched something buried long before even her mother's time. The villagers began to leave. Some gathered their things in silence and disappeared into the bush. Most didn't make it far. Paths twisted. Directions failed. One group was found walking in a circle for hours, their skin crawling with black dust. Others stayed and went mad. One woman was found sitting in her cooking hut, talking to the fire as though it were her child. A boy clawed at the floor of his hut until his fingers bled, insisting he heard the earth asking for a mouth. An old man dug his own grave and lay inside it, smiling, whispering, "She's in the roots now, she's in the roots." The land itself had become her ally. It was no longer just Nia that the villagers feared, it was the very ground they walked on. The air. The silence. Nothing could be buried anymore. Because nothing stayed buried. At night, groans rose from the soil, not human, not animal. Just sound. Agony in root and rock. And Nia, she walked the village freely now, speaking rarely, eyes glowing faintly, body thin but upright, held together not by bone and will, but by something deeper. The spirit beneath had awoken. And it had found a voice in her. The severing had failed. The village had failed. Now, the earth had decided it was time to rise. The shaman arrived at dawn, cloaked in dust and silence. He came not with drums or songs, but with the quiet power of those who walk between worlds. His name was Odiu, and his face bore the tattoos of Earth Watchers, those sworn to monitor the stirrings of the buried ones. He had traveled across deserts, crossed poison rivers, and followed whispers carried by roots and winds to reach the cursed village. The people watched from behind cracked doorways as he entered, staff humming faintly with heat. The land seemed to recognize him. Vines recoiled. The air cleared. For the first time in weeks, the ground beneath the village stilled. He did not speak to the elders. He did not seek the council. He asked only one question. Where's the girl who hears the earth? They pointed toward the blackened compound, toward the twisted house standing amid pulsing roots and scorched soil. Odiu walked alone, his shadow long and unwavering. He stepped over dead leaves, broken bones, and iron nails embedded in the earth like a forgotten warning. She was waiting. Nia stood barefoot in the ash circle at the center of the compound, arms at her sides, her eyes glowing faintly. Around her, the soil pulsed like a breathing thing. Even the shadows were still. You've come to end me, she said, her voice softer than wind but heavier than stone. Odiu shook his head. I have come to ask you one question, child of soil and sorrow. He stepped forward, planting his staff into the ground. The earth hummed underfoot. What do you seek? Nia's expression crumbled. Tears, hot, golden, fell down her cheeks, tracing glowing trails. Not revenge, she whispered. Not pain. She paused. Just to be seen. Just once. Odiu bowed his head. Then there may yet be balance. He spoke of the buried ones, ancient spirits born of injustice and agony, trapped beneath the earth for centuries. Their whispers echoed through roots and bone, waiting for vessels strong enough to carry their grief. Sometimes they rose in fury, sometimes in mercy. But always, they demanded choice. You were not cursed, Odiu told her. You were chosen. But you still have a choice. He drew a circle in the dirt with his staff and whispered ancient rites. You can bind yourself to this village, as its protector, feared but respected. Or, you can consume it. Let it rot with the pain it gave you. The spirits will not stop you either way. Nia looked to the horizon where the village shimmered under the heat of the rising sun. How will they choose? She asked. Odiu turned to the villagers gathering in silence, dread on their faces. They must vote by fire. A great ritual was prepared. The villagers were instructed to craft offerings of honesty, no lies, no performance. Whatever they feared or loved most, they had to give. A child's toy. A thief's confession. A hunter's broken arrow. An elder's walking stick. Even the blind woman gave her last calabash of water. At sunset, the village gathered in the square. A great pit had been dug at the center, an ancient hearth once used for ancestral rites. Into it, the offerings were cast, and the fire was lit. As the flames rose, so did the tension. If the fire burned white, the spirits had accepted Nia's binding. She would become guardian, spirit walker, a being of balance. If it turned black, the village was condemned. But someone among them did not believe in rituals. Someone wanted Nia dead. A young man named Tebaho, Bako's cousin, had hidden a poison iron dagger among the offerings. A weapon forged in bitterness, dipped in snake venom, wrapped in lies. He believed if Nia was killed during the ritual, the spirit would vanish with her. As the fire cracked and roared, the dagger began to melt. And the flames turned red. Then green. Then erupted. A howl unlike anything the villagers had ever heard split the night. The sky ignited in golden light. The earth cracked beneath their feet. Screams rose, but not of pain. Of awe. From the center of the fire, Nia emerged. She did not walk, she rose, lifted by unseen roots, her body glowing with soil veins and ember eyes. Her skin was marked with runes of earth and fire. Half her face shimmered with bark-like patterns, her arms trailed embers. She had become something both old and new. Tebaho, the traitor, tried to flee. Nia raised her hand, and vines shot from the earth, wrapping his legs, pulling him to the ground. She looked at him, not with hate, but disappointment. You offered deceit in a ritual of truth, she said. But your punishment is not mine to give. She turned to the villagers. You feared me, she said, her voice echoing like thunder muffled by soil. "You left me. You watched him nail me to the earth, and did nothing." A silence fell so heavy that even the fire bowed low. But the earth watched. She stepped from the fire pit, barefoot, leaving behind blackened footprints that grew green shoots moments later. "I will not destroy you," she said. "But I will not save you, either." She looked to Odiu. "Tell them, they must walk clean now. Or the earth will decide again." Odiu bowed deeply. The villagers wept. That night, no one slept. And in the morning, they found Nia gone. But in every garden, a single new shoot had grown. In every well, the water was clear again. And in the sky, birds flew forward. The village never forgot the night the fire swallowed the darkness, nor the girl who rose from its ashes. Life returned, but it was forever altered, scarred and humbled by forces unseen, yet deeply felt in the soil beneath their feet. The air seemed charged with a quiet reverence, as if the earth itself whispered ancient secrets just beyond hearing. Nia no longer limped. Her bare feet, once cruelly nailed and broken, now moved with a graceful certainty, as though the land had claimed her as its own and, in turn, healed her. Wherever she stepped, the earth responded, sometimes blooming with wildflowers, other times smoldering with fresh scorched earth. Her footsteps left marks that flickered like soft firelight or fresh green shoots depending on the mood of the land. In time, the villagers began to speak of her not as a broken child, but as something greater, a myth, a guardian, the girl nailed to the ground who chose to stand. Mothers whispered her name when children were afraid, and elders told her story in hushed tones by the fireside. To the village, Nia was no longer just a girl, she was the embodiment of the earth's stubborn will to survive and reclaim what was hers. Her house, at the heart of the village, became a place apart, untouched by time or decay. The walls, once scorched and twisted by roots, held firm. No moss grew there, no vines curled to trap it. It was a sacred space, a boundary between the living and the deep, dark soil that held the buried ones. No one dared enter without invitation, and none tried to change or harm it. In the quiet hours before dawn, some claimed to see a faint golden glow emanating from the windows, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Nia did not speak much anymore. Instead, she walked the edges of the village, silent and watchful. But those who suffered, children who were broken by the cruelty of adults or haunted by nightmares, found their way to her doorstep. There, she taught them to listen, not just to her voice, but to the language of the land beneath their feet. The whisper of leaves, the hum of roots, the songs carried on the wind. She showed them that the earth held memories and power, and that fear could be transformed into strength. One young boy, once too afraid to speak, learned to find courage in the rustle of grass. A girl who had lost her family found comfort in the pulse of the soil beneath her hands. They came from all corners of the village, gathering quietly, learning from the spirit who had once been a girl nailed to the ground and who had chosen instead to stand. But not all stories in the village ended peacefully. One evening, a new shadow arrived, a man who married into a family with promises and smiles, but with hands quick to hurt. A new stepfather, harsh and cruel, unseen by those who had long forgotten the price of silence. That night, as the moon cast thin silver across the village, the man's anger boiled over. In a fit of rage, he cornered the child he was supposed to protect, raising his hand to strike. But before his fist could fall, the earth beneath him cracked open, splitting like the pages of a long-forgotten book. Nails, iron and ancient, erupted from the soil, piercing through his feet. He stumbled, terrified, unable to pull free. The ground trembled as something unseen stirred beneath. The child's terrified scream was swallowed by the night as the man vanished, taken by forces old as the land itself. By morning, all that remained were the iron nails hammered deep into the earth and footprints, large, impossibly wide, and unlike those of any man, leading away into the wilderness. The villagers found the child unharmed, sitting quietly by Nia's house, humming the song of the earth. No one spoke of the man again. The story of Nia, the spirit who stood, became legend, passed from one generation to the next. A warning, a promise, and a hope that those who suffer in silence might find strength in the earth beneath their feet, and that justice, ancient and patient, would always rise. The girl with silent eyes had chosen to stand. And through her, the land itself watched, waited, and guarded the village still.